This is a 1999 BMW 323 IS that was destined for the junkyard. And this is the guy that just won't let it die. Now this BMW has a problem. Well, a lot of problems. But the most important one is that, according to the state of California, I am not the rightful owner. And the reason for that is what's coming out of the tailpipe. In order to sell a car in the state of California, it's supposed to have a smog test. And if it doesn't pass that smog test, technically you're not supposed to sell the car. Now, of course, people will sell their cars regardless, as is. The problem pops up, they can't figure it out, they don't want to deal with it. What that means is that the buyer is in charge of getting the car smogged before they can actually register the car in their name. Now, as you can probably guess, I am the buyer, and the car is not passing smog.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really.
And because California gives you a 10-day grace period between when you purchase a car before you actually get it registered, I'm driving on borrowed time. So what we're doing today, very simply, we are trying to get this car to pass emissions. I'm going to show you everything that I've looked at, do a little diagnostics, and see if we can figure out what the issue is, or a way to at least improve the emissions to the point where we can pass, to where we can register it, and then later dive in and figure out exactly what's going wrong. Let's start with what we know. This car has 253,000 miles on it, and this is allegedly a new motor with 75,000 miles on it. The Smog Center said that the car passed everything except for the idle hydrocarbons test. Essentially, that means that the car has unburnt fuel coming out of the tailpipe. In other words, it's running rich. And that number was 150, where the number to pass is 100. So realistically, it's not that far off. We also know that the catalytic converter was replaced in like 2014 with this aftermarket one that has pretty shoddy looking welds. So now we pull the codes with our OBD2 reader. Right now the car has 0 codes, which means that the ECU believes that it's running totally fine. However, when we first bought the car, it came up with 4 codes. It was a misfire in cylinder 5, misfire in cylinder 1, a lambda controller adaptation bank 1, and a random diagnostic error. However, when we cleared those and then took it for a test drive, the only thing that came back was a cat efficiency code. Now, I bought the car fully aware of these issues and was fully prepared to fix them, but after clearing the codes, they might have existed from prior to the engine swap. I really want to make sure that I'm not just throwing parts at it and replacing things that don't need to be replaced when this is supposed to be, somewhat of a budget build. So we did some research and created a list of different things to check for our misfires and unburned fuel issue before we start replacing parts altogether. And kind of think about them in terms of easiest to tackle to most difficult. The spark plugs and the coil packs, the MAF sensor, which you can easily clean, a cracked air filter housing, or some vacuum leaks. Again, from a recent engine swap, there's definitely a possibility that there is something not plugged in right. And again, though the engine might be new, all the surrounding parts could still have 250,000 miles on them and might need to be serviced anyways. Things like the PCV valve, ICV valve, fuel injectors, VANOS, which we really don't want to get into if possible, and of course the O2 sensors and or an exhaust leak. So, easy place to start is cleaning your fill system. Now, I've never tried this stuff before, but I was recommended it by someone in my live stream. That's called Guaranteed to Pass by CRC. I think it's just a standard fuel system cleaner, but again, at 250,000 miles, this absolutely could potentially help us out. It's probably not the main issue, but you get double your money back if you don't pass. So, now that we know the fuel system will get cleaned regardless of everything else, let's move on to the engine itself. We know we want to check the coils and the spark plugs, which are located underneath this cover right here. We want to check the intake system for any cracks that are letting unmetered air flow past the MAF sensor. We'll also inspect the fuel system for any visible leaks, and then we'll also probably remove this air box and check underneath here for the ICV valve and look for any cracked hoses, any issues like that. Right off the bat, we can already see that there's an issue with this stock airbox. If you look closely at this MAF sensor and these screws, it looks like it has not been removed in a while, meaning that simply cleaning the MAF sensor might help us out. It's always interesting when you start pulling apart a new car for the first time. I'm removing this weird looking box with a cable sticking out of it, which turns out to be how they added cruise control to a car with a physical throttle cable. The stock airbox is next, and I can already tell it's cracked and falling apart in multiple places. And right off the bat, so we can see our alternator cooling hose, for whatever reason, is cracked. I don't think that's the main cause of any of our issues. And we just found something extremely suspicious. We can see, if we look over here, see that orangey looking thing right there? That's actually flexible, almost like it's part of the intake manifold gasket. We'll have to take a closer look at that. That could definitely cause an intake leak, right? I'm assuming this is our Vano solenoid. That looks like it was leaking at some point, if not currently. So we get that cleaned up and take a closer look over time. But let's keep checking for more. So we're gonna pull this really quick. So we checked around for anything else that we could easily access and see as far as loose vacuum lines or other hoses. One potential culprit that seems to be loose or cracked potentially directly underneath the intake manifold. And I also realized that I could pop off this, I believe it's the PCV valve. Before we move further, I'm going to pull the MAF sensor out, give it a good cleaning, and then we made a crazy discovery. There's a new spot where air is getting in after the mass airflow sensor. So this is actually great news until I looked up how much the part actually costs, because this is an old BMW, right? 20 bucks. Only thing that really sucks is that it's gonna take 3 days to get here. So I could try and patch that in the meantime. But regardless, I'm gonna go finish checking the spark plugs really quickly. I'm assuming they're not an issue. Never really thought they were anyways, but we'll check them real quick. This metal clip right here, you basically pull up on these tabs on each side, just like that. Then you're able to wiggle out the black plug, just like that. Then you got two 10mm bolts for each coil pack, and they pop right out. But how does a coil pack work? They take the 12-volt energy from your battery and transform it to up to 50,000 volts to be used by your spark plug. These are mismatched and cracking, so I definitely want to replace them soon, but the oil coating some of the spark plugs is a little more concerning and suspicious because the seller told me this is supposed to be a new engine and a valve cover job. All right, let's try this again. Useless part right there. Actual part we need, ideally in here. Yes. Exactly what we need. Gonna swap the hose clamps, remembering the orientation that they were in. Back one's on the right, front one's on the left, and we reinstall. Pro tip, if you're having trouble getting a tight fitting into, hoses, stuff like that, good thing to use is silicone spray. Just a little bit of this should hopefully make this much easier. All right, the new boot is on and secured. Put the hose clamp in the same spot. There's an indentation that you actually slide this over. So you push it until it actually snugs into place. Now, last thing before we put this all back together is we're gonna clean the MAF sensor really quick. Now, in case you didn't know, the mass airflow sensor does what it sounds like. It generates a voltage based on how much air is passing across the wires of the sensor. With everything cleaned up, I'm reinstalling the MAF, the stock airbox, and the cruise control. All right, moment of not really truth, because it's not like it's gonna run any worse, hopefully. And we will check one other thing, which is the CCV valve. You can check it just by popping the oil cap while the car is running and seeing if there's hard to release. Seems good. Let's try popping this cap. Pretty easy. Alright, so the car is warmed up. We have our parameters set. We're mainly looking at this long-term fuel trim. If that goes down after we drive it for a while, then that means that the car is adapting to having the proper amount of airflow recognized. Well, as is becoming a running theme with this car, our brake lights have stopped working along with basically our entire instrument panel. And if we look at our data, our long-term fuel trim has actually increased from 6 to 7. Back to the drawing board.